To Britain, they say, we've had our lunch, now let's get back to work. It's amazing how the papers have absolutely decided that Rishi Sunak had a belter yesterday with his Eat Out to Help Out scheme. The Metro, Rishi, 2 snacks, punters scoffing double meals on Eat Out deals. The Daily Express, painkillers do more harm than good. The Sun has a story about Prince Andrew. The Daily Mirror, test and trace fiasco is time bomb. They say scientists say flawed system won't prevent a worse second wave in December. The Guardian too has this story about the Russian hack. Russians stole secret documents from ex-minister's personal email. We'll speak to a former director of GCHQ a bit later on as well, and talk about their front page picture, which shows John Hume, a titan and a visionary, tributes to John Hume. We'll speak to Tony Blair's former Chief of Staff in just a few moments too. Susan's in Twickenham this morning. Hi there, Susan.
Hello.
Hi, you want to talk about the travel quarantine?
Well, I did. I returned from Mallorca last Wednesday, where I must say everybody, adhered to the wearing the mask rule, the sanitising rule. It feels a million times safer than here. And then on Friday, I did actually get a call from Track and Trace. That just said, they said that they understood I'd come back from Spain, informing of my last day of quarantine, which was the 11th of August. And then just said that if I felt unwell, I was not to go to the doctor, the chemist, or the hospital, but to ring 111.
And have you been observing your quarantine, Susan, since you came back on Wednesday?
Not 100%.
Right. What have you been doing?
Well, I haven't actually been to the shop, but I've took my dog to the park for a walk, and I haven't been shopping or anywhere with lots of people, but I haven't actually stayed indoors 100% either.
Were there throngs of people at the park where you were taking your dog? Were you shoulder to shoulder?
No, not at all.
And where were you in Spain? Mallorca?
I was in Mallorca, yeah, and I mean, it's so strict there, I can't tell you. And when you first get there, it's a bit strange, but I mean, if you take your mask off in the street, somebody taps you on the shoulder.
Really?
Put your mask
Interesting.
on. Every restaurant you go in, there's no menus in restaurants, it's QR code, you have to scan on your phone. All the waiters in the restaurants are wearing masks.
And what did you have to do at the airport on the way back, Susan, whether it's Spanish side or UK side, apart from handing you a little chit of paper saying where you'd been?
Nobody asked for my sheet of paper.
Right.
So I just walked through as per normal. Nobody asked for it. You fill it on online, but nobody asked to see the paper, nobody asked if I'd filled it in, nothing. I just walked through.
Do you have confidence in this system?
No, not really. I was quite astounded to get, because I travelled with my daughter and friends, they haven't had it before. But no, not really. I can't see. I just think when you've been in Spain and everybody are doing, when you go out here, no one's wearing a mask, are they? No one meant to. Half the people's that.
Well, and just very finally, because I've got a guest waiting, but who is it who's tapping you on the shoulder? If you slightly remove your mask for a split second on the beachfront in Mallorca, who's tapping you on the shoulder?
The Guardian Civil, the police.
Right.
That says, well, you cannot take it off. And if you're in a restaurant, you have to go to the loo, you have to put your mask on. And if you don't, one of the waiters or somebody says, you please put your mask on.
See, I just worry that we haven't got this right yet. We've been dealing with this for months and months and months, and even at the airport, we just can't. It doesn't seem that anybody's following up on this stuff. But Susan, I'm glad you got a call. Thank you for yours. 7:26 is the time. Let's turn to the tributes that have been paid to John Hume, the former SDLP leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who died yesterday, aged 83.
It is completely fair to say that without John Hume, I think it unlikely there would have been peace in Northern Ireland. He was one of a handful of people who really made it happen. And he began on that journey of peace when most people thought it was completely impossible, when there was still very high levels of violence, because we forget now thousands of people died in the troubles in Northern Ireland, tens of thousands injured. He was right at the outset the person who, when it wasn't fashionable, said this could become a reality. And he turned out to be right, but for many years it looked as if he was, wrong about it.
Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister, of course, at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, paying his tribute yesterday, as did the former US President Bill Clinton. Let's turn to Jonathan Powell, former Downing Street Chief of Staff, former Chief Government Negotiator in Northern Ireland. You were in those rooms, Jonathan, where history was being made. Tell us the role that John Hume played. Morning to you.
Oh, as Tony Blair just said, he was crucial. He was a guy who had been arguing that peace was possible for so long. He was like a stop clock, and eventually he was right, that it was possible. And it was impossible in large part because of his courage. He was the first person to break the taboo on actually talking to Sinn Féin and the IRA. He secretly met with Gerry Adams in the 1980s, even though they tried to attack his house, even though he'd been under threat of being killed by the IRA for all those years because he denounced violence. But he realised he had to reach out to them, and he did reach out to them, and that's what gradually brought them in. And if he hadn't developed those ideas with Gerry Adams, then we wouldn't have had John Major's Downing Street Declaration in '93 and the IRA ceasefire.
And what was he like as a negotiator? Because it's all very, as you say, it's all very well making the first move to meet people, but you have to know what your aims are and what your plan to get there is.
Well, he was endlessly imaginative. He was constantly sort of trying to nobble me or Tony Blair in the corridors and House of Commons who got new ideas, don't give up, let's try this, let's try that. And when we actually got to the Good Friday Agreement, he was the one who negotiated the power share, which was crucial to Northern Ireland. Because, of course, he'd been involved in negotiations right back to the 70s when these ideas had first been put forward in Surreydale. So he was, he could be quite eloquent at the wrong moments. He would talk at length and so on. That used to annoy the unionists. But it was his conviction that it could be done that was so important. He was absolutely persistent in going for peace, and it paid off in the end. And most people, that doesn't happen.
For someone who had been so committed to it for such a length of time, I wonder if you remember what his reaction was or what his demeanour was like at the time when the deal was finally done and people could say that they had achieved what they wanted to achieve.
Yeah, he was very teary-eyed when we got to the Good Friday Agreement, and of course, if you remember, Sinn Féin at the time couldn't accept the Good Friday Agreement. They said they had to go away and consult.
Yeah.
So Adams and McGuinness couldn't go out and sort of celebrate or anything. So the only people celebrating on the Catholic side was the SDLP and John Hume. But for him, I think that was a huge relief, although he didn't give up even then, because then we had to get the thing implemented, and that took another 9 years. People forget it wasn't just a Good Friday Agreement. It then kept on falling over. We couldn't get the institutions up and running, and John Hume continued to play a role in that and bring that about.
And I wonder too what lessons there are for the rest of us in the future about how to negotiate peace, and perhaps even speaking to those people to whom you wouldn't necessarily want to speak to, or to whom there would be public pressure to not speak to, given the violence.
Absolutely. I mean, people object, understandably, and that we should never talk to terrorists. And it goes all the way back to Lloyd George in 1919 when Sinn Féin first appeared. He said, "We will never talk to this murder gang." 3 years later, he was using someone very much like me to try and meet Michael Collins and negotiate peace. We see it again and again. The PLO, we couldn't talk, we negotiated peace. When I left government, I said we should be talking to Hamas and to the Taliban. And I was denounced by people in government back in 2008 because they said we should never talk to those groups. Well, the Americans are now negotiating a peace agreement with the Taliban, the Israelis are negotiating with Hamas. So we should remember from what John Hume did, he was excoriated at the time for talking to Hamas. If he hadn't done so, we wouldn't have got to peace.
Incredible legacy, isn't it? Jonathan Powell, thank you so much for your time. Former Downing Street Chief of Staff, former Chief of Government negotiator in Northern Ireland, paying his own tribute to John Hume, former SDLP leader, Nobel Peace Prize winner, who died yesterday, aged 83. To come back to your calls, your thoughts in a moment on what can be done at the UK border to strengthen our response to the COVID-19 outbreak in Europe, as the government is calling it. Whether if you've come back from a country like Spain, have you had a phone call from a test and tracer to say, have you been observing the quarantine rules? Would you bother? Take your thoughts in a moment. And
investigations are continuing after 2 bodies were found in a car at a Dorset beauty spot. I'm LBC's Lauren Roberts with the latest.
Details from our reporter in just a few moments. Tom Swarbrick here, 7:31 is the time. News headlines now. Simon Conway.
A new study suggesting a second wave of coronavirus in the UK could be 2.3 times higher than the first in a worst-case scenario. The researchers are warning the NHS test and trace programme needs to be scaled up in order to reopen schools safely. Pupils across Scotland are finding out their grades despite not having sat any exams, which were cancelled due to the COVID-19 crisis. This year's results have been awarded based on coursework and teachers' estimates. EasyJet says it has more bookings for the rest of the summer than it expected. The airline started flying again in the middle of June after its fleet was grounded in March because of the pandemic. The weather, outbreaks of rain spreading across northern areas, turning heavy and persistent for parts of western Scotland, mainly dry elsewhere with some sunshine in the southeast, a high of 23 degrees.
LBC.
Are you getting a train over the bank holiday weekend? If so, here's some important news from us at Network Rail. There are engineering works planned in many parts of the country from the 29th to the 31st of August. To find out if your journey will be affected, please check before you travel at nationalrail.co.uk/August.
How do we control coronavirus now? Listen to Steph. She's a bus driver. Now that people are using public transport again, we really need to make sure that we keep each other safe. Passengers need to stay 2 metres apart. If that's not possible, make it at least 1 metre. I want to see everyone wearing face coverings over their mouth and nose, unless you've got a good reason not to. And when you get to where you're going, you need to wash your hands. We've still got to play our part.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Moneypenny receptionists answer and transfer calls remotely, economically, brilliantly. Miss the office? Maybe. But you won't miss a call with Moneypenny.
At Big Motoring World, we usually say go big or go home. But now we're saying go big from your home. Order the car you love from the thousands online and then collect in store. Contact-free digital signing, sanitized cars, and a whole lot of loving from 2 meters. Big Motoring Love has never been so clean. Order online at bigmotoringworld.co.uk.
For the businesses who employ, innovate, and create.
GovGrant's R&D tax relief expertise is so reassuring, and the results are fantastic.
For the thinkers, the risk takers, who make Britain great.
GovGrant really understood our company's activities and which ones qualified for the R&D tax relief scheme.
Whatever you do, maximise the value of your innovation in research and development. Visit govgrant.co.uk. That's govgrant.co.uk.
Zing Flowers, a beautiful way to say, I appreciate you. Order now at zingflowers.com. Amazing every time.
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast with Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
7:34 morning to you. Continue to take your calls, your thoughts on what can be done at the UK border to strengthen our COVID-19 response. Do you know there's a document circulating from January from a meeting of NERVTAG. I don't want to give you too many acronyms at this time, but it's a meeting of the new and emerging respiratory virus something group. And their discussion in January was that 4 out of 5 coronavirus cases discovered outside of China were discovered by testing at airports. And yet they also decided at that meeting that testing at a UK airport wouldn't be that effective. 4 out of 5 cases. Come on to that a bit later on. Let's get a business update first. David Buick is from Aquis Exchange. Very good morning to you, David.
Top of the morning to you, sir.
I've got 2 HSBC stories I want to talk to you about in a moment, but there's some breaking news around EasyJet, given we're talking travel.
We are indeed, and they're back in the skies, so they tell us, which is very good news. They have just made £7 million in revenue for the first 6 months of the year. They started flying again. They reckoned about 40% capacity. And in June, they carried 117,000 passengers out of 132,000 seats. This all sounds great, but as long as there are no further cutbacks, like going to Spain, going to Portugal. I mean, Johan Lundgren mentions how fun it is to be able to go back to the south of France and also to Faro. I hope he's right, because with this pandemic just showing signs of spiking, I just don't want to spoil the party. The outlying figures that they've posted, Tom, look really encouraging, and I couldn't be more delighted for people, but we must care a little bit.
We just heard the news a bit earlier from one of our guests about Hayes Travel and the job cuts there, but tell us about Hayes and DW Sports, if you would.
Yeah, Hayes Travel is a well-known operator in the north of England, basically, and when Thomas Cook hit the rocks, they took more than 2,000 employees on, which showed tremendous style, in my opinion. Anyway, the pandemic has taken its toll, and they've had a look at their business, and out of 4,500 employees that they have, they're having to let 878 employees go. It's inevitable that Sunderland-based operation can only do as much as it possibly can. And the same applies to DW Sports. This is a sports chain that was built by Dave Whelan, the old Nottingham Forest footballer who owns Wigan Athletic. 1,700 jobs to go and number of units to be cut, as well as 73 gyms. Not good news, but we've not heard the last of this stuff, Tom, I'm afraid.
No. So front page of the Financial Times, HSBC, you were telling us yesterday, profits plummet 96% amid pandemic crisis and US-China spat. You flick over to the Daily Telegraph business front page, HSBC refuses to guarantee Hong Kong staff safety. They've got problems on a lot of fronts, haven't they?
A huge number of fronts. Their main problem, of course, is the provisions for bad debt at $6.9 billion, which is miles bigger than any of the other banks, including, people like Morgan Guarantee, who are pretty big. So they have made a provision. That provision may actually end up being $13 billion. The fact is that they are stuck between a rock and a hard place politically. Here is a London listed bank